Hello, in this video we're going to write a program that displays flashing text. Sounds exciting, but we're actually going to use a lot of the animation features of JavaFX. For example, we're going to use a timeline object to automate an animation for us, and we're going to add keyframe objects to our timeline to specify actions that need to occur at certain points in time. So let's jump over to Eclipse and get started. We'll create a new project. This will be a JavaFX project, and we will call it Timeline Demo. Now, the first thing we'll do is add a class to this in the default package, also called Timeline Demo. Okay, I'll maximize this to give us some space, and we'll make our class extend application. Okay, next up we'll create our start method. So public void start takes in a stage object as its parameter. Okay, so what we're going to do is create a stack pane, and then to this stack pane we'll add some text, and it is this text that will make flash in our animation. So we'll create our stack pane object. We'll call it pane. Use the default constructor to build the object. Next up, we'll create some text, and we'll do this using the text node. So text, we'll call this text equals. Now the constructor we're going to use takes in a position where the text will be displayed and the string that actually gets displayed on screen. So the position we want is 20 in X and 50 in Y. And the string we're going to use is programming is fun. It sure is. Now the next thing we're going to do is set our text to be red in color. And the way we do this is using the setFill method. So text.setFill. And what we're going to do is use the color class, and it has a constant red that we can use. Oops, I got a little bit carried away with my Eclipse shortcuts there. Anyway, we're setting the fill of the text to red. Next up, we're going to add our text to the pane that we just created. And the way we do this is pane.getChildren, and then we add our text node to the list of children that belong to pane. The next thing we're going to do is create an event handler. So what we're going to do now, I need to point out that in the book, the example code that we're dealing with uses lambdas to create the event handler. However, we can't do that, and the reason is that I am using Eclipse in December of 2013, and Eclipse, the latest release of Eclipse in 2013, does not support lambdas because lambdas are introduced in Java 8, which officially, at the time of recording, has not been released yet. You can get pre-release developer versions, but officially Java 8 has not yet been released. So this next bit of code is going to differ slightly from what you may see. I'm going to use an anonymous class instead of a lambda. No big deal though, you can still follow along. So I'm going to declare an event handler, which takes in an action event. Now when I press Control space to bring up autocomplete, we need to make sure that we specify that we're interested in a JavaFX event, not an AWT event. Otherwise we'll run into some problems. I'm going to call this event handler, and it's going to be equal to a new event handler action event. And here comes our inner class. So what I'm going to do is specify the handle method. Okay, now what we're going to do in this event handler is what we want to make our text flash, or in other words, each time handle is called, we need to alternate between displaying nothing or displaying our string. And so the way we're going to do this is when our handle method is called, we're going to check to see what the text is currently set to. And so we have our if statement. So we get the actual string of our text node. And if the length of our string does not equal 0, which is what we expect because we've just specified that the string is equal to programming is fun, then we're going to replace the text in our node using the setText method with an empty string. We also need to set this to final. Again, this is the final keyword here is just because, again, we're not using Java 8. So I apologize for that. So, moving along. We need an else here to get our text to flash. So if the length of our string inside our text node is equal to 0, then we're going to replace it with our original string. So we're going to specify text.setText, and it's going to be equal to our original string. So programming is fun. And I need to close the string there. Okay, so that is going to be the event handler that we're going to use to make our text flash. But how do we actually accomplish that? What we're going to do is use a timeline object. I'll call this animation. Now, before we actually build the object, I want to talk briefly about what a timeline does. I'll just hit Control Space to get rid of that error. So, imagine that you've got time and it runs along like this. What we're going to do with our timeline object is specify things that need to occur at different points in time. These things that occur at certain points in time are called keyframes. Now, if you've done any kind of animation in any kind of animation tool, you would probably be familiar with keyframes. But this is how JavaFX does it. So imagine animation. Oh, my handwriting is terrible, but it doesn't matter. It goes along in time like that. And then when we want something to occur, we specify a keyframe at this point in time. And then a bit later on in our animation, we might specify another keyframe. And now this could be any number of things. It could be specifying the position of a node of an object that's being drawn on screen. It could be the transparency. It could be any number of properties that we want to manipulate. Animation doesn't care. It's very, very generic in how it can be used. What we are going to do is create an animation that contains a keyframe which calls the action event that we just wrote. So let's do that now. We already have our timeline object called animation. Let's build this now, initialize the object. We're going to call new timeline. And the constructor we're going to use takes in a keyframe object. So we're going to call new keyframe. And the constructor we're going to use for keyframe takes two parameters. It takes in a duration, or a point in time is another way of thinking about this, but duration. And we're going to specify in milliseconds 500, in other words, half a second. The second parameter to keyframe is what we actually want to occur. It's going to be the event handler object that we've just created. So event handler, like that. And now we've built our timeline. So what this is saying is we've got a timeline that represents our animation, and the only keyframe we have is at 500 milliseconds into our animation, we're going to call our handle method of the event handler object we just created. Now this error is simply because I haven't got the import sorted. There we go. Control space fixes that for us. So there are a couple of things we need to do before we make this work. The first thing is we want this to flash, which means we need our event handler's handle method to be called over and over again. The way we do this is by setting the cycle count of our animation. So animation.set cycle count. Now, normally we could specify a value in here, as in a number of cycles that we want to occur, or we can make it loop forever. And the way we do this is using timelines, constant value, indefinite, like that. By specifying this as our cycle count, our animation will loop forever, which is exactly what we want in this video. So the next thing we need to do is call play on our animation. And that is all we need to do. So all that's remaining is to create our scene and get this thing onto the screen. So we're going to create a scene object. We're going to pass in the pane that we created at the start of the video, which contains, by the way, our text node. We're going to specify the size of the window to be 250 by 250. We need to press. There we go. Got rid of that error. We're going to set the title of our stage to timeline demo. We're going to set the set the scene of our stage. How on earth did that occur? I forgot. This is what happens when you type and talk at the same time. Anyway. We'll set the title of our stage to timeline demo, then we'll set the scene, and then we'll show it. Okay, the last thing we need to do is specify a main method so that we can get our program to run in Eclipse. And all we're doing is calling launch with our command line arguments passed in. So now we can actually run this program and see what happens. And there you go. You can see that we've got programming is fun flashing at every half a second it changes, which is exactly what we expected. So actually, let's not stop here. What we'll do now is create another action event for pausing and resuming the animation. So what we're going to do is, just before we start adding things to our scene, is specify an event handler for our text node when it gets clicked on. So the way we do this is get our text node and call set on mouse clicked. And again, we could be using lambdas if Java 8 was supported, but it's not. So I'm going to create an anonymous inner class. Oh, this should be a mouse event. Get Eclipse to add our handle method for our mouse event. And all we're going to do is toggle whether the animation is playing or not. So the way we're going to do this is by having an if statement. Now, we can get the status of our animation. In other words, we can find out whether the animation is currently playing or whether it's paused, and a few other properties. But what we're interested in is whether it's paused. So animation.getStatus equals animation.status.paused. So if it's paused, we're going to play it, and if it's not paused, we're going to call pause on it. So this error here is also because we haven't specified this variable as final. So we'll do that now. So back to where we were. If the current status of animation is paused, then we're going to call play on our animation. Otherwise, we're going to call pause on our animation. Okay, so now when we run this, you can see we have our flashing programming is fun text, but when I click on this, you can see the animation stops. If I click on it and again, it resumes. So you can see here how we've got our on mouse clicked event handler working to toggle whether the animation is occurring. So with that, that's it for this video. Thanks a lot.